Ready? Lights are on. Good morning.
Morning.
I'm David Barish, Chairman of the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board. Before we begin, I'd like to again ask people to turn off their electronic devices or put them on silent. With us today is Fred Strathmeyer, representing Russell Redding, the Secretary of Agriculture, Jen Langen, representing Joe Torsella, State Treasurer, and Bob Coyne, representing Acting Secretary of Revenue, Dan Hassel. Thank you all for coming. A quorum of the board being present, I will call today's proceedings to order. First order of business, the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before we proceed today with our formal agenda, I would like to offer a few comments on behalf of this board. As many of you probably know, over this past weekend, our friend and colleague, Amina Young, suddenly passed away in her home in Philadelphia. Amina joined this board last October and has been with us for only 8 short months. But despite her brief tenure, I know she's made a lasting impression on everyone here. Her kindness, her wisdom, her generosity, and from my observation, her quiet and self-effacing wit added a lot to the lives of so many people around her. In short, she was a class act and an absolute joy to work with. And for me, she became a friend and a personal confidant in the very brief time that we worked together here. She will be sorely missed by all of us, and we offer our condolences to her family. At this time, I would ask for a few moments of silence in her honor. Thank you. Today, we have a hearing pertaining to Chester Downs and Marina LLC and Harrah's Chester Downs Management Corporation's joint petition for approval of a change of ownership in certain affiliates and certain other relief. Essentially, what has triggered the need for this petition is the reorganization of the Caesars organization following the filing of a bankruptcy action 2 years ago. While Harrah's Philadelphia and the real estate upon which it sits are not part of this bankruptcy, since 2 upstream companies with an interest in our property are involved, we will see some changes and this proceeding is needed. So with that by way of background, Harrah's, let me start with introductions. Please state and spell your name, anybody who's going to be speaking today, for the court reporter. And I would also ask, and we'll finish that, for all the non-attorney witnesses to please stand and be sworn. Could each of you identify yourselves for the court reporter, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bill Downey with Fox Rothschild on behalf of Chester Downs and Marina LLC and Harrah's Chester Downs Management Company LLC. To my left is Tim Donovan, Executive Vice President, General Counsel, and Chief Regional and Compliance Officer for Caesars Entertainment. To Tim's left is Chris Albrecht. Chris is the GM and Senior Vice President at the Harrah's Philadelphia property. And to Chris's left is Lynn Hughes. Lynn is Chief Regional Counsel.
Okay. Thank you very much. You may begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, we're going to start today's proceedings with a pretty brief PowerPoint presentation to describe to you how we got here, what changes you'll see, and you referred to them as occurring upstream with upstream affiliates, and we'll close out with any questions. With that, I'm going to ask Tim Donovan to start our presentation.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members, commissioners, and ex officio designees. I'd like to start out first by offering condolences on behalf of the entire Caesars family on the passing of Amina Young, and offer that to not only her family but also to this board. So I want to begin and recognize that. It's good morning. It's indeed a pleasure to be here, which hopefully marks the beginning of the end of a saga that's been going on for more than 2.5 years. And that saga, starting with the January 15th of 2015 filing of Caesars and Caesars wholly owned subsidiary, CEOC, and primarily operating subsidiary, of a Chapter 11 proceeding in the U.S. Bankruptcy Court in Chicago. Just a brief updating of where we are. On January 17th of this year, we did have a plan that was confirmed by the bank. As I mentioned, that took just a little over 2 years. It's been a long time coming, and it was a hard time getting to that plan confirmation on January 17th. I'll talk a little bit about what the plan involves and what will happen on emergence, which we anticipate will happen later this year, sometime here in the third quarter, probably in the latter half of the third quarter. So on the effective date of the plan, Caesars Entertainment and CEOC will be substantially delevered, and that's the key takeaway from the plan. So as the slide indicates, $16 billion less debt, so a substantial deleveraging event. $1.5 billion less annual interest payments, which will help considerably with the financial health of the Caesars enterprise, and generating, as opposed to the last 7-8 years, a negative cash flow. Will be generating $900 million approximately of annual positive cash flow from an enterprise perspective. Thus, again, really 3 big events happening here. The first event would be the CEC and CEOC's financial conditions being significantly improved from what has been for the past, since the leverage buyout back in 2007. Putting Humpty Dumpty back together again by merging CAC back and into CEC. And then CEOC transferring its properties to a newly formed real estate investment trust, the stockholders of which, at least initially, will be the first lien bondholders. What does that mean in terms of the Apollo interests and the board of directors? Apollo and TPG's interests will be significantly diluted as a result of these transactions. And there will be new boards at the CEC level and then at the CEOC level, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. And let me add, if there's any questions along the way, please stop me. I'm trying to be brief and give a high overview, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Going to the third slide, just take a little closer look at what the new debt structure will look like compared with the prior debt structure. So if you read this page from left to right, you can see, beginning on the left-hand side, the enterprise level debt on January 28, right after the leverage buyout, and what it looks like all the way to the right in terms of the debt at emergence, and then on the far right, the difference between the January levels and the emergence levels. So again, $16 billion less debt on an enterprise level at Caesars. $1.3 billion less annual interest. There's some interest and other payments that make that number a little bit larger on an enterprise level. And then approximately 8+ the difference between this $8 billion of positive cash flow and the $900 million that I mentioned previously is related to some CERP properties and the refinancing of those CERP properties, which are not part of this bankruptcy emergence. CEOC will have a new term loan of approximately $1.2 million. And then, of course, the Chester financing of approximately $330 million, or the Harrah's Philadelphia financing, will stay in place. So again, the key takeaway, moving to the bottom of the slide, less debt, less interest, less leverage, more cash flow. Our cost of capital will be reduced substantially. We anticipate a reduction in the interest rate from what we have historically of roughly 10.4% down to about 3.4 to 4.4 reduction. So bringing the capital structure much more in line with a market type of capital structure and approaching a much higher credit rating than we've had historically, generating more operating cash flow. I think Bill's going to take us through these.
Sure. Thanks, Tim. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, the next 5 slides get into the weeds a little bit, so I'm going to go through them pretty quickly. But I think it's important. We want to demonstrate sort of where the action is occurring, and ultimately the fact that it doesn't have an impact on us in the Chester facility. The first step here that Tim mentioned earlier is a merger of CAC, Caesars Acquisition, back into Caesars Entertainment Company. Tim refers to that as putting Humpty Dumpty back together again. That merger occurs and starts the sort of restructuring transactions in exchange for their shares in Caesars Acquisition. Holders will receive Caesars Entertainment equity. At that point, CEC is going to contribute cash and convertible notes down to CEOC, to CEOC. The net effect of that transaction is going to be to effectively dilute out of the shareholdings about 11% of the holders of CEOC. It is the non-CEC owned shareholder that gets taken out by this step. Remember, the CEC convertible notes, they'll come back in a moment. But effectively, what will happen by virtue of that transaction is that the dilution will take out the non-CEC shareholders. In these 4 bullets, I have consolidated about 3.5 inches of slides that are going to describe to you how the REIT is going to be formed and ultimately flooded with assets. The very short version of this story is that CEOC will form a REIT that will sit under CEOC. That REIT will be the landing place for all of the real estate related to those properties that are going to participate in the REIT structure. CEOC and its subsidiaries will continue to hold the operating assets and the licenses. The shares of the REIT will then be conveyed out to the 1L creditors, as Tim has alluded to earlier. The CEOC entities and the REIT entities will then enter into long-term leases to establish the baseline structure. So in addition to receiving the ownership of the REIT, the creditors will also receive from CEOC a basket of other assets, including cash, CEC preferred stock, and the CEC convertible notes that we described a couple of slides ago. Finally, CEOC, which is a Delaware corporation, will merge into a wholly owned LLC, a CEC wholly owned LLC, in order to convert its structure from a corporation to a limited liability company. In connection with that process, the holders of CEOC preferred stock will receive CEC common stock, and then certain holders of CEC common stock, in accordance with the terms of the plan, will have the opportunity to cash out at that point. With that, I'd like to turn it back to Tim to discuss changes to the board of directors.
As I mentioned earlier, this plan results in a new board structure of both CEOC and CEC. And this page, it just reflects at a high level the composition that will occur as a result on those board levels. So on the effective date, CEC will have 11 board members. One of them will be the current CEO of CEC, so a non-independent board member. There will be 8 members that will be independent as defined under the NASDAQ rules, and they are appointed by various of the committees of the creditors in connection with the bankruptcy. And then 2 of the members will be non-independent, and that has non-independent in a sense not only from a NASDAQ rule standpoint, but also not independent from Apollo and TPG. Those 2 designates, one's coming from Apollo, the other one's coming from TPG, and they have been identified. The 7 of the 8 independent members have been identified, and of course the CEO board position has been identified. So what we have are 9, 10 of the 11 have already been identified. They've been disclosed in our S-4 registration statement that we have on file with the SEC for purposes of the merger between CAC and CEC. And 9 of the 10 are already licensed or have applications pending in the various jurisdictions where that is required. On the effective date, the board of directors of CEOC will consist of 3 members, one of whom will be independent as defined, again, under the NASDAQ rules. And after the effective date, the board directors, after they're appointed, they become members of the board and forming a formal functioning board on emergence. From that point forward, whether they remain board members will really be a function of normal corporate governance and will be elected in accordance with their class structure going forward by the stockholders of CEC. So just looking finally at the final structure as it relates to Harrah's Philadelphia, I think the takeaway here is nothing really changes at the property level. It stays where it is in the current structure. It is not part of the REIT. CEOC will be wholly owned by CEC, and CEC and CEOC, as I mentioned, will have new board of directors. So it's a non-event, if I can say that, and without minimalizing it, but it is truly a non-event, at the Harrah's Philadelphia property level, no impact whatsoever. And frankly, that's been true throughout all of our properties in terms of operations. There really has never been an impact as a result of the bankruptcy filing. Has been an impact on operations, and it's really been seamless. In fact, even in the context of our employees, with the exception of people such as myself and some of the accounting folks being actively and personally involved and having to do all this in addition to our day jobs, the people running the operations have really been, by and large, unfazed by this whole process, which is good news. And indeed, our operations on an enterprise level have continued to improve since the filing, and things are looking up for seizures at an enterprise level. Before I, as I mentioned, this has been a long journey. It's even as you all know, beginning before the actual bankruptcy filing on January 15th of 2015, and I'd be remiss if I didn't take a few moments to thank the Cyrus Petrie and his team on the OEC, and Doug Sherman in the Office of Chief Counsel. This has been, we have worked hand in glove with the team. They've done a fantastic job. Couldn't have been more cooperative, and did everything to help us along in this process. And we feel like we were very transparent with them. I will say, I think at the conclusion of this, we've been having a monthly call. And if I can use this term, I think Cyrus and I have a bromance we've developed. And unfortunately, we're not going to be talking once a month. It'll be good we're not talking, because that represents the fact that we're going to be in good shape. But it's also I'll miss those monthly calls, believe it or not. So I want to again thank Cyrus, his team, and Doug, and those folks for being so cooperative and so helpful to us in getting through this very arduous time.
Mr. Chairman, just one final one final point. As you're aware, in our petition, and to pick up on Tim's theme, we are of the position that there is virtually no substantive change at the property level and in connection with our licensee. And on that behalf, I won't belabor the point, but on that basis, we have requested that we be given some consideration for relief from what has been the board's standard in application of a change of control fee.
Yes.
With that, we'll handle any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Enforcement Counsel.
Glenn Stewart for the Office of Enforcement Counsel, STUART. We have no questions today and no presentation. We would just like to say that there have been monthly phone calls with Caesars throughout this entire process. They have kept us informed. They have been completely cooperative. They are submitting applications as necessary as requested by staff, so we'd like to thank them for their cooperation in that respect. We have no issues moving forward. We did not object to the relief requested in the petition. But we would ask that the board implement the conditions that we put in our answer and have those affected on the property.
Are there any questions or comments from the board? No.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And please feel free to call Cyrus, but initiate the call so the Commonwealth isn't burdened with the long-distance charge.
Yes. Duly noted.
Just two quick questions. One may be a little bit redundant, but I'd still like to ask it. First question, does the resolution of this bankruptcy have any effect on agreements that Harrah's Philadelphia currently has in place with the community?
No, it does not.
And the second question, which is, I think, the redundant one because you already answered it. As a result of the resolution of the bankruptcy, should the board expect to see any changes in the operation of Harrah's Philadelphia?
Should see none whatsoever.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You don't have a separate presentation, obviously.
No, sir.
Thank you all.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, just as a point of order, we'd like to submit the PowerPoint evidence. Thank you.
That's fine. Thank you. Thanks for pointing that out. A vote on this petition will be scheduled for later today under the Office of Chief Counsel section of the agenda. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Doug, your call. What's your call?
By way of announcements, the board held an executive session yesterday, June 6th, to conduct quasi-judicial deliberations relating to matters being considered by the board today. Under new business, we will first hear from Executive Director Kevin O'Toole. Kevin?
Good morning, Chairman Barish. Good morning, members of the board. I, too, would like to say a few words about Commissioner Amina Young on behalf of all of our staff at the Gaming Control Board. In the short period of 8 months, Amina touched the hearts of many employees, especially here at our Harrisburg office. From her executive secretary, Evelyn Early, to Pam and Doreen and Angela, and our receptionist, Rita, to Director Moselle Daniels, Administrative Director Claire Yantis, and myself, just to name a very few, we all came to appreciate very early the warmth and kindness of Amina. She took a very sincere interest in her colleagues, and whenever she engaged you in a conversation, she always wanted to know, how were we doing? Our staff was very privileged and honored to know Amina and to work with her over the past 8 months. We are so better off for that experience. We publicly wish Amina's family comfort and solace in this very difficult time. Thank you, Chairman.
Anything else, Kevin, this morning? Claire?
Good morning, Chairman, board members. The Office of Human Resources has one motion for your consideration today relative to the hiring of Sharice McMichael. Ms. McMichael has completed the PGCB interview process, background investigation, and drug screening, and is recommended for hire as an executive secretary in the Bureau of Licensing by Director of Licensing Susan Hensel. Unless you have any questions, I ask that the board consider a motion to hire Ms. McMichael as indicated.
Any questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the applicant as proposed by the administrative director.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chief Counsel Doug Sherman.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the board. Today we have 3 petitions before you for your consideration. One of the petitions was that of Chester Downs and Caesars Entertainment, just heard a short time ago. And the remaining petitions can be decided upon the record by agreement of the parties. In each of those matters, the board has, in advance of the meeting, been provided with all pleadings or other documents filed of record. The first matter before the board is the joint petition of Eldorado Resorts Incorporated, IOCPA LLC, and Presque Isle Downs Inc.'s request for approval of corporate fee and shared service agreements. Eldorado is the ultimate parent company of Category 1 licensee Presque Isle Downs and of Category 3 management company licensee IOCPA, which operates Lady Luck Casino at Nemacolin. The parties are seeking approval of 2 corporate shared service agreements, one between Eldorado and IOCPA and one between Eldorado and Presque Isle Downs. The agreements will allow Eldorado to provide services to IOCPA and Presque Isle Downs in the areas of administration, management, and operational support. In exchange for the services, both IOCPA and Presque Isle Downs will pay fees to Eldorado pursuant to the terms of the agreement, drafts of which have been provided to the board in advance. The Office of Enforcement Counsel does not oppose the granting of the petition, subject to 14 conditions set forth in their answer, and the record is now closed on that matter and it's ready for the board's consideration of a motion to approve.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board grant Eldorado Resort Incorporated petition for approval of corporate fee and shared services agreement as described by the Office of Chief Counsel and with the conditions requested by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The next petition is that of Chester Downs and Marina and Chester Downs Management Company, and it's their petition for approval of a change of ownership of certain affiliates and certain other relief, which is the matter the board just heard. The Office of Enforcement Counsel has not objected to the petition, subject to several conditions outlined in their answer. That matter is now closed and ready for the board's motion.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board grant Chester Downs and Marina LLC and Harrah's Chester Downs Management Company LLC's joint petition for approval of a change in ownership of certain affiliates as described by the Office of Chief Counsel, and with the conditions requested by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that the board impose a $100,000 change of control fee relative to this reorganization. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
The final petition before the board pertains to the Office of Enforcement Counsel's request to place Georgina Mamari on the involuntary exclusion list. The uncontested facts in the matter show that on January 19th, 2017, Ms. Mamari, who was 20 years of age and a non-English speaking native of Syria, presented her valid permanent resident card to a security officer at Sands. The security officer misread the identification presented by Ms. Mamari and allowed her to enter the gaming floor. She was on the gaming floor for over an hour and gamed to several machines before a second security officer approached her, requested the identification, and then discovered that she was not 21 years of age. In March of this year, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a petition to place her on the involuntary exclusion list. She requested a hearing in this matter, however, it was continued due to the need for an interpreter. Ms. Mamari subsequently decided to waive her right to a hearing, allowing the board to decide the matter on the documents of record, and that's the request of Enforcement Counsel to place her on the involuntary exclusion list that is before the board.
Questions or comments from the board?
One question. Again, she was cited and pled guilty, is that correct?
She did, yes.
To underage gambling.
Correct.
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, under the circumstances described, I move that the board deny the Office of Enforcement Counsel's request to place Georgina Mamari on the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Next, presenting withdrawals and a report and recommendation is Deputy Chief Counsel Steve Cook.
Morning. The board has received several unopposed petitions to withdraw the applications or surrender the credentials of the following individuals or entities: Evelyn Galindo, Alicia D. Ray, Jason N. Ader, Daphne Hearn, Reitman Pty Limited, Paul L. H. Ainsworth, Robert Don, Abby Don, the Robert E. Don EDC Gift Trust, RED GGC Trust, and Charlotte Don. The Office of Enforcement Counsel has reviewed each of these requests and has no objections to any of them. As a result, if the board were inclined to grant same, they'd be doing so without prejudice to each of the requesters.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board issue orders to approve the withdrawals and surrenders as described by the Office of Chief Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Before the board today, we have just one report and recommendation for consideration. This report and recommendation was received from the Office of Hearings and Appeals. It pertains to the placement of Rashida Fabor on the board's involuntary exclusion list, and it was forwarded to the board in advance of this meeting along with the complete evidentiary record. Ms. Faber was also notified that the board would be taking the matter up today and that she could come before the board and briefly address you all. If she is in the room, I'd ask her to come forward at this time. The facts established in this matter at the hearing that was held before the Office of Hearings and Appeals shows that on November 25th, 2016, Ms. Faber and a friend entered the gaming floor at Mohegan Sun, refusing to stop and provide identification as requested by security. Upon security following the two women onto the gaming floor and once again being approached, her friend, Ms. Faber's friend, provided her identification to security officer. However, Ms. Faber continued to resist that request. Ultimately, she became argumentative, yelled, and made derogatory comments to security, which triggered security calling PSP. PSP ultimately confronted this woman. She became physical, ultimately causing injury not only to a patron that was nearby, but also damaging the eyeglasses that were worn by one of the troopers. She ultimately was charged with resisting arrest, criminal trespass, disorderly conduct, and criminal mischief. These charges were, however, ultimately dismissed after she made restitution to pay for the troopers' glasses. At the hearing, which she attended, she presented testimony indicating that she had previously that evening provided her identification to security and didn't feel compelled to do it again. She also basically indicated that this was her first run-in with the law, and as a result, she asked for some leniency on behalf of the board and that she not be placed on the excluded persons list. Notwithstanding that testimony, the hearing officer's recommendation in the report and recommendation is that she indeed be placed on the list, and that is the recommendation before the board.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board adopt the report and recommendation as described by the Office of Chief Counsel and that Ms. Faber be placed on the board's list of excluded persons.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
And that concludes the matters of the Office of Chief Counsel.
Doug? Sorry. Sean Hannon, Manager of the Licensing Enterprise Unit.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the board. Before the board today, there will be 698 principal, key, gaming, and non-gaming employee applicants. In addition, there will be consideration for 21 gaming service provider applicants. The first matter for your consideration is the approval of principal and key employee licenses. Prior to this meeting, the Bureau of Licensing provided you with a proposed order for 3 principals and 10 key employee licenses. I ask that the board consider the order approving these licenses.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? Have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the issuance of principal and key employee licenses as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Next, there are temporary principal and key employee licenses. Prior to this meeting, the Bureau of Licensing provided you with an order regarding the issuance of temporary licenses for 4 principals and 16 key employees. I ask that the board consider the order approving these licenses.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? Have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the issuance of temporary principal and key employee credentials as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
There are also gaming permits and non-gaming registrations. Prior to this meeting, the Bureau of Licensing provided you with a list of 453 individuals to whom the Bureau has granted temporary or full occupant permits. The 182 individuals to whom the Bureau has granted registrations under the authority delegated to the Bureau of Licensing. I ask that the board consider a motion approving the order.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the issuance of gaming employee occupation permits and non-gaming employee registrations as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Next, there are recommendations of denial for 1 gaming service provider, 2 gaming, and 1 non-gaming employee applicants. In each case, the applicant failed to request a hearing within the specified time frame. The Bureau of Licensing has provided you with orders addressing the applicants who the Office of Enforcement Counsel has recommended for denial. I ask that the board consider a motion approving the denials.
Enforcement Council continues to request denial in each instance.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board deny the gaming service provider, gaming and non-gaming employee applications as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Also for your consideration are withdrawal requests for key and gaming employees. In each case, the permit or registration is no longer required. For today's meeting, I have provided the board with a list of 1 key, 23 gaming, and 2 non-gaming employee withdrawals for approval. I ask that the board consider the orders approving the list of withdrawals.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the withdrawals as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Next, we have an order to certify the following gaming service providers: Burgess Steel Erectors of New Jersey, LLC, Central Metals, Incorporated, Callista Electric, Incorporated, Samuels and Sons Seafood Company. I ask that the board consider the order approving these gaming service providers for certification.
Enforcement Council has no objection.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the applications for gaming service provider certification as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Finally, for your consideration are gaming service provider registrations. The Bureau of Licensing provided you with an order and an attached list of 17 registered gaming service provider applicants. I ask that the board consider the order registering these gaming service providers.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the applications for gaming service provider registration as described by the Bureau of Licensing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
This concludes the Bureau of Licensing matters.
Thank you, Sean. Next up, Office of Enforcement Counsel. As we begin, would like to ask anyone addressing the board to please state and spell your name for the court reporter. Also, anyone other than attorneys must be sworn in before speaking. Cyrus?
The Office of Enforcement Counsel will present 16 matters today for the board's consideration, consisting of 6 consent agreements, 2 revocations, and 8 involuntary exclusions. The next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is a consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Category 1 licensee Presque Isle Downs, Inc., doing business as Presque Isle Downs and Casino, and its affiliate licensee Eldorado Resorts, Inc. The matter will be presented by Assistant Enforcement Counsel Benjamin Farrell.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the board. Benjamin Farrell, Ferrell.
If there are any members on the Eldorado team, I ask that they introduce themselves to the record, and if anybody needs to be sworn in.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Sitting to my left is Thomas Rieg, who is the president and CFO of Eldorado Resorts Incorporated. And also behind me to my right is Ed Quatman, who is the executive vice president and chief legal officer for Eldorado Resorts. And sitting next to him is Jeffrey Hendricks, who is the vice president of compliance for Eldorado Resorts. So I don't know whether there'll be questions that they may answer or not, but let's have them sworn. And
That'd be great. Thank you. Before you proceed, maybe I missed it, just for technical point, would you identify yourself?
Might as well, yes. Thank you.
What the heck?
I apologize for that. Stephen D. Schreier with the law firm of Blank Rome on behalf of Presque Isle Downs and Eldorado Resorts.
Thank you.
The matter for your consideration considers it as a consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel, Eldorado Resorts, and Presque Isle Downs and Casino regarding unapproved shared services and corporate fee agreements and unlicensed employees. Following Eldorado Resorts, Inc.'s acquisition of Presque Isle Downs and Casino in the fourth quarter of 2014, Eldorado and Presque Isle entered into a corporate fee agreement under which Presque Isle paid Eldorado for certain expenses. Eldorado assessed the fee regardless of the services provided and did not base the fee amount on any specific calculation. In 2015 and 2016, Presque Isle paid Eldorado a total of $7,401,344 under the terms of the agreement. This agreement was not put into writing. Beginning in the second quarter of 2015, Presque Isle began paying Eldorado for corporate support services, which included advice, guidance, and services from certain Eldorado employees. This services agreement was not reduced to writing either. Presque Isle paid Eldorado an average monthly fee of $17,247.66 under the terms of this oral agreement. Eldorado and Presque Isle did not receive board approval for either agreement, and in doing so violated the board's regulations. As a result of these agreements, approximately 15 employees performed or may have performed their job duties requiring licensure without having the requisite license or having applications for the requisite license pending before the board. Under the terms agreed upon, Eldorado and Presque Isle are required to pay a civil penalty of $150,000 as well as a $2,500 investigative fee.
Comments from Eldorado?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I start, I also had the privilege of appearing before you and before Commissioner Young, and on behalf of the company and myself, also want to express my condolences to her family and to you as board members, co-board members. I think you've heard sort of the gist of what our situation is, and we thought it was important enough today to have all the top folks from Eldorado here. The consent agreement that we've entered into with Office of Enforcement Counsel is the culmination of some significant discussions that we've had over time, and I want to thank OEC and the board staff for the cooperation that they've had with us in talking about this particular issue. The company and its management are extremely unhappy that this series of events occurred, and they apologize to the board and staff for this serious lapse in compliance. While nothing here was done with any intention to violate the board regulations, the mistakes that were made were not caught for an extended period of time. Several opportunities existed to recognize the right course, but those were missed. So as a result, particularly in the area of shared services, several people, over a dozen people, were acting without being licensed by the board. And until your approval today, which you just recently voted on a few moments ago, approving the shared services agreements, El Dorado and Presque Isle were out of compliance. As a consequence, the company acknowledges and agrees to the sanction, which is a meaningful message to them. We have provided the board with several mitigating factors in the statement that we submitted. Those are not designed to be considered excuses for what occurred, but rather to acknowledge the mistakes and provide you with assurance that these kinds of compliance issues will not happen again, and that the folks for El Dorado are going to ensure as they go forward, particularly since their merger, that they are carefully reviewing all their compliance and ethics policies, and that they're going to be making changes and engage in activities to ensure that these kinds of compliance issues are addressed promptly and dealt with. So with that, I would just introduce the president and CFO, Mr. Reeg, who I think will just say a few words.
Thank you, Steve. Members of the board, I wanted to be here personally to offer apologies for being here in this situation. We're disappointed that an oversight on our part early on post the Presque Isle acquisition was allowed to remain in place for as long as it was. We realize that gaming licenses are a privilege, not a right. We take that very seriously and are disappointed in ourselves for being in this position, and I just want to apologize to you personally.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from the board on this? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel, El Dorado Casino Resorts, Inc., and Presque Isle Downs, Inc., as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
The next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is a consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Greenwood Gaming and Entertainment, Inc., doing business as Parks Casino. The matter will be presented by Senior Enforcement Counsel Dustin Miller. Representatives for Parks are present, and at this time I request that those individuals introduce themselves for the record, and if necessary, stand and be sworn.
Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. My name is Brian Schroeder, Schroeder, the Vice President of Regulatory Affairs with Greenwood Gaming and Entertainment, Inc. With me today, I have the Director of Security, Jerry Fretz, the General Manager of Parks Casino, Paul Greco, and the Director of Table Games, Steve Fain. I'd ask the gentleman to please stand to be sworn in.
I do.
Good morning, Chairman Barish, members of the board. Dustin Miller on behalf of the Office of Enforcement Counsel. This consent agreement arises from two incidents of underage gaming at Parks Casino on March 12, 2016 and April 8, 2016. Both the Pennsylvania Racehorse Development and Gaming Act and the regulations promulgated under the Act prohibit a slot machine licensee from allowing persons under the age of 21 to access the gaming floor and or engage in gaming in Pennsylvania casinos. On March 12, 2016, an individual under the age of 21 entered Parks Casino at 9:06 a.m. The individual was 20 years of age at the time of this incident. The individual was able to enter the casino without being asked for identification. The individual remained on the gaming floor of Parks Casino for approximately 1 hour and 36 minutes before it was ascertained that she was under the age of 21. The individual placed 2 wagers at a roulette table while on the gaming floor and did not consume any alcoholic beverages. The underage individual was detected by a table games dealer at a roulette table after she was asked for identification, which revealed her to be underage. Although the table games dealer immediately reported the presence of the underage individual to her supervisor, the supervisor did not immediately report the presence of the underage individual to the security or surveillance department. A second supervisor reported the presence of the underage individual after approximately 6 minutes elapsed from the time of discovery, which gave the individual time to leave the casino. Pennsylvania State Police and the Bureau of Casino Compliance were notified of the incident at that time. However, due to the passage of time, the underage individual was not positively identified and was not criminally charged by Pennsylvania State Police for this incident. A surveillance review of the incident shows that the underage individual had face-to-face contact with 8 individuals while on the gaming floor of the casino. On April 8, 2016, an individual under the age of 21 entered Parks Casino at 7:58 a.m. The individual was 20 years of age at the time of this incident. The individual was able to enter the casino with an associate without being asked for identification by the security officers stationed at the west entrance to the casino. The individual remained on the gaming floor of Parks Casino for approximately 1 hour and 4 minutes before it was ascertained that she was under the age of 21. The individual played 27 different slot machines while on the gaming floor and did not consume any alcoholic beverages. The underage individual was detected when her associate was taken into custody by Pennsylvania State Police for possession of a controlled substance, and the associate told the security department about the presence of the underage individual and Pennsylvania State Police. However, when her associate was taken into custody, the underage individual quickly exited the casino. The associate also told Pennsylvania State Police that the underage individual had entered Parks Casino previously that day. Surveillance footage confirmed that the underage individual had previously entered Parks Casino at 3:34 a.m. Although the individual was stopped and asked for identification when she entered the casino, another security officer interceded on her behalf and granted her entrance onto the gaming floor. The underage individual proceeded onto the gaming floor, where she remained for the next 3 hours playing slot machines. Subsequent investigation revealed that the underage individual had unsuccessfully attempted to enter the casino a third time in between her first and second forays onto the gaming floor at Parks Casino. During both instances that the underage individual was granted access to the gaming floor, she had no face-to-face contact with any other employees of Parks Casino except for the security officers. The underage individual did not consume any alcoholic beverages in either instance. The underage individual did use an on-site ATM machine and a ticket redemption machine while at Parks. The underage individual was positively identified in this matter and was cited by mail by Pennsylvania State Police with a criminal violation of the Gaming Act for underage gaming. On May 5, 2017, the parties entered into a consent agreement to settle these outstanding compliance matters. If approved, this consent agreement will be the 4th penalty assessed against Parks for violating the Act and board regulations pertaining to underage gaming since its last renewal, and 9th overall penalty for underage gaming violations. The terms of the agreement include a provision that Parks Casino shall reinforce existing policies and provide training, guidance, and reinforcement to employees to minimize the opportunity for similar incidents of this nature to occur in the future. And also, Greenwood Gaming and Entertainment, Inc. shall pay a total fine of $35,000. Greenwood Gaming and Entertainment, Inc. shall also pay a fee of $2,500 for costs incurred by the Office of Enforcement Counsel, Bureau of Investigations and Enforcement, and other related staff, which is consistent with the board's billing policy. Both the fine and cost shall be due within 5 days of the board's approval of this consent agreement. As Cyrus stated, counsel for Greenwood Gaming and Entertainment, Inc. And some staff are in attendance today to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions from Greenwood?
Chairman and Commissioners, before I begin,
any comments?
Extended condolences from the entire Parks family on the passing of Commissioner Amina Young. We will keep you and her family in our prayers. I've already introduced our Director of Security, General Manager, and Director of Table Games, and they will be here to answer any questions that you have. As I've said when we were here last time, Parks always strives to have regulatory compliance 100% of the time. I apologize to say that we were here today because we had 2 failures in that instance, these 2 underage incidents. And we do not dispute the facts recited by OEC. We would like to provide you some additional information. First, in regards to the March 12th incident, the table game supervisor who failed to notify security or surveillance immediately received employee discipline and a written discipline warning. And in addition, which we thought was most important, the breaking supervisor who did notify surveillance did so immediately upon being notified by the dealer of the underage incident. We know that our staff are trained and it was a proper protocol and they knew to do that. But to ensure that after this incident, our table games management and team has pre-shifted repeatedly with our table games staff to immediately notify security or surveillance when an underage person is found at a table game. In addition, on the April 8th incident, all the security guards identified by OEC who allowed the underage person to gain access to the floor received a 4-day suspension without pay. In addition, Director Fretz has pre-shifted with his staff to ensure anyone appearing under the age of 30 has their identification checked at the entrances. But most importantly, I believe, because these incidents occurred so close together, Director Fretz conducted an examination of the Parks Casino floor and determine if there was any additional items he needed to make us more secure to prevent these from happening in the future. He identified the need to create bottlenecks or choke points at the entrances. So he asked for large-scale planners for two of front entrances as well as stanchions. In addition, he asked for identification scanners at all three entrances. That was a $35,000 capital outlay that the Board of Directors immediately approved, and they are in place today. In addition, Director Fretz increased his staffing at peak times and days on the entrances, so there's more security officers there. We'd be glad to answer any specific questions you have about either incidents now.
Thank you. Any questions or comments on the board, Tony?
Just one quick question, Mr. Schroeder. Did you say that you just purchased 3 ID scanners?
We purchased, was it 3 or 2 more?
It was actually 4.
4, we purchased 4.
And this scans like a driver's license or
Yes.
something? You had not previously had those at the
No,
entry
I'll let
point?
Director Fretz explain. Go ahead.
Commissioner, early on, we evaluated the handheld devices, and as a matter of fact, in the old building, and they created more of a diversion than the good that they did. They would not pick out a counterfeit license. They would merely tell you whether or not the person was of age. So someone could defeat that with some of the modern counterfeit devices. I asked for and received permission to order sophisticated ID scanners. They have an international database. They're updated monthly. And we also have the ability to scan international passports.
Okay, thank you.
Bill?
If I can, Mr. Schroeder, how many entrances are there onto the gaming floor at Parks?
3, I believe, correct, Paul? 3?
And-
3.
So what you're telling the board is that you have a better opportunity now to limit the entrance area and therefore increase your ability to see everybody coming in. Would that be an accurate statement?
Yes, Commissioner.
And about how many people come into the casino, busy times, in a 24-hour period? About?
Thousands, sir. I don't have the exact
5,000 to 6,000.
We did, I believe, did we do a report maybe 2 or 3 years ago? The number of unique visits we had was it, what was it, Jerry? 5 million? Around over the course of a year.
Okay, so on a busy Friday night, probably thousands.
Thousands.
All right, thank you. That's all I have, Chairman.
Other questions? We have a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Greenwood Gaming and Entertainment, Inc., as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
The next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is a consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Chong Browning. The matter will be presented by Assistant Enforcement Counsel David Tepper. I believe if Mr. Browning's present, or Ms. Browning, no, she's not here? Okay. Explain to the board.
Good morning, Chairman Barish, members of the board. David Tepper, Tepper, with the Office of Enforcement Counsel. Between March 20th and March 21st, 2017, Chong Browning engaged in a course of conduct which the Office of Enforcement Counsel alleged violates the board's regulations. OEC engaged in negotiations with Ms. Browning, by which she has entered into this consent agreement that will have her gaming employee permit suspended for 3 days. Ms. Browning has represented to me that she is unable to be here today because of her work schedule, but that she fully understands the consequences and obligations of this consent agreement. At this time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests that the board approve the consent agreement to suspend the gaming employee permit of Chong Browning for a period of 3 days.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Chong Browning as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is a consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Alexander Kuznetsov. The matter will be presented by Assistant Enforcement Counsel David Tepper.
Good morning again. On December 11th, 2016, Alexander Kuznetsov, who was 20 years old at the time, attempted to enter Mount Airy Casino and was asked for identification by Mount Airy security personnel. At that time, Mr. Kuznetsov produced a false identification card which identified him as being 22 years old. OEC engaged in negotiations with Mr. Kuznetsov, who was represented by counsel Brian Jordan. Mr. Kuznetsov has entered into this consent agreement by which he agrees to be placed on the exclusion list until at least his 22nd birthday, which would be July 24th, 2018, or 1 year after this consent agreement is approved by the board, whichever date shall occur last, after which time he may petition to be removed from the exclusion list. Attorney Jordan has represented to me that his client agrees to and understands the terms of this consent agreement, and he has informed me that he is unable to be here today because Mr. Jordan is attached in the Court of Common Pleas in Monroe County. At this time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests that the board approve the consent agreement to place Alexander Kuznetsov on the board's involuntary exclusion list, consistent with the terms set forth in the consent agreement.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Alex Kuznetsov as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The next matter on the board's agenda is a consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and William Treveludis. The matter will be presented once again by Assistant Enforcement Counsel David Tepper.
William Treveludis is the holder of a gaming employee permit, which was suspended by order of the executive director on February 10, 2017, after he was charged with 2 felonies following an incident involving his children. At the time of the incident, Mr. Treveludis had a medical condition which had impacted his cognitive function. OEC engaged in negotiations with Mr. Treveludis by way of telephone, with his father present on the phone calls as well. And prior to entering into negotiations with OEC, Mr. Treveludis was found by the Court of Common Pleas in Monroe County to be able to knowingly, intelligently, and voluntarily enter into a guilty plea for his criminal actions. Mr. Treveludis has on multiple occasions expressed to me that he understands the terms of the consent agreement and the consequences and benefits of entering into this consent agreement. Mr. Treveludis has entered into this consent agreement by which his gaming employee permit will remain suspended until such time as his physician certifies that his cognitive function has returned to levels acceptable for return to work. Mr. Treveludis has further represented to me that he's unable to be present today because he has a medical appointment regarding his underlying cognitive disability. At this time, the Office of Enforcement Counsel requests that the board approve the consent agreement to continue the suspension of William Treveludis' gaming permit consistent with the terms set forth in the consent agreement.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and William Treveludis as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted. Thank you.
The next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is a consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Samuel Rice. This matter will be presented by Assistant Enforcement Counsel James Armstrong.
Morning, Chairman, Commissioners. Next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is a consent agreement reached between Samuel Rice in regard to petition to place Mr. Rice on the board's involuntary exclusion list. Commissioners, on June 3rd of 2016, a security supervisor at Sugar House Casino became suspicious of Mr. Rice and 2 other individuals being underage in the casino. A security check determined that Mr. Rice's ID was a fake Connecticut driver's license. Security questioned Mr. Rice about his identification. Mr. Rice admitted that the identification was false. A review of the surveillance coverage revealed that Mr. Rice gambled on a blackjack game, was served an alcoholic beverage, and was in the casino for 32 minutes before he was confronted by security and escorted off the floor. The Pennsylvania State Police issued Mr. Rice a citation for being on the gaming floor underage and underage drinking. He was issued a formal eviction notice from Sugar House Casino. As a result, OEC filed a petition to place Mr. Rice on the board's involuntary exclusion list. Subsequently, Mr. Rice, through his counsel, reached a consent agreement with the Office of Enforcement Counsel in this matter. Commissioners, the OEC and Mr. Rice requested the board approve the consent agreement and stipulation of settlement entered into between the parties to resolve the exclusion petition. The terms of the settlement include provisions that Mr. Rice will be placed on the board's involuntary exclusion list until at least his 22nd birthday or 1 year after the board's approval of this consent agreement, whichever shall occur last. Mr. Rice will be barred from petitioning the board for early removal from the list or requesting a hearing concerning his removal until the agreed upon exclusion period has elapsed. Mr. Rice will be ejected upon sight from all licensed facilities. Mr. Rice is barred from receiving any winnings as a result of gaming activity, and Mr. Rice's photograph, physical description, date of birth, and a summary of his inimical conduct will be placed on the board's public website. Should Mr. Rice file a petition to be removed from the exclusion list after his 22nd birthday or 1 year from the board's order, whichever shall occur last, OEC will not object to such removal provided Mr. Rice has not been charged with any further gambling or gaming-related crimes, and he has not entered or attempted to enter a licensed facility in Pennsylvania. I spoke with Mr. Rice's attorney, Jonathan James, that he advised that they would not be attending this morning's proceeding. I'll be glad to answer any questions any you may have.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the consent agreement between the Office of Enforcement Counsel and Samuel Rice as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted. Thank you.
The next two matters on the agenda consist of enforcement actions in which the Office of Enforcement Counsel has filed complaints seeking the revocation of 2 non-gaming registrations issued by the board. Each complaint has been filed with the board's Office of Hearings and Appeal and properly served upon the persons named in each complaint. The person named in each complaint failed to respond within 30 days as required by board regulation. As a result, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a request for default judgment and properly served the same upon each named person. Therefore, the facts in each complaint are deemed admitted. All filed documents have been provided to the board, and the matters are presently ripe for board consideration. In each instance, we will provide a brief summary of the facts and request the appropriate board action.
The next matter for your consideration is a complaint to revoke the non-gaming employee registration of James Williams. On January 8th, 2017, Mr. Williams took a patron's wallet from Valley Forge Casino Resort's gaming floor and did not notify Valley Forge security. Mr. Williams left the facility with the wallet in his possession. After a criminal investigation was opened regarding the matter, PSP contacted Mr. Williams regarding the wallet, and he subsequently returned to Valley Forge Casino Resort to return the wallet. At this time, OEC requests that the board issue an order revoking Mr. Williams' non-gaming employee registration.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the revocation of James Williams' gaming employee occupation permit as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the board. Tamara Haken, Haken, with the Office of Enforcement Counsel. The next matter on the agenda for the board's consideration is the revocation of the non-gaming employee registration issued to Isamar Reyes. Ms. Reyes was a cocktail waitress at Hollywood Casino who was found to be accepting payment for drink orders from patrons and then comping those drinks to producer cards belonging to other patrons while pocketing the money she was given as payment. Ms. Reyes admitted to stealing $8,000 from the casino in this manner. She was terminated and charged with 1 count of theft by unlawful taking in August of 2016. The charge was changed to a summary offense of disorderly conduct, for which Ms. Reyes entered a guilty plea in September of 2016. As a result, OEC requests that the non-gaming employee registration issued to Isamar Reyes be revoked.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move the board approve the revocation of Isamar Reyes non-gaming employee registration as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted. Thank you.
The remaining 8 matters on the agenda consist of enforcement actions in which the Office of Enforcement Counsel has filed petitions seeking the involuntary exclusion of individuals whose presence in a licensed facility are inimical to the interests of the Commonwealth and or licensed gaming therein. In each instance, the petition for exclusion has been filed with the board's Office of Hearings and Appeal and properly served upon the individual named in the petition. The individual named in the petition failed to respond within 30 days as required by board regulation. As a result, the Office of Enforcement Counsel filed a request for default judgment in each instance and properly served the same upon each named individual. Therefore, all facts in each petition are deemed admitted. All filed documents have been provided to the board, and the matters are presently ripe for the board's consideration. In each instance, if the board orders the proposed exclusion, each individual's photo, personal identifiers, and a summary of the inimical conduct will be placed on the board's public website.
James Armstrong again for the Office of Enforcement Counsel. Next on the agenda, Chairman and Commissioners, for the board's consideration is a request to place Ruhan Bora on the exclusion list as a result of Mr. Bora utilizing fraudulent identification to access the gaming floor at Sugar House Casino while under the age of 21. Mr. Bora was arrested by the Pennsylvania State Police and charged with violating Section 1518A13 of the Gaming Act, unlawful to permit person under 21. Accordingly, OEC requests the board place Mr. Bora on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Ruhan Bora to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Mr. Bora may petition for removal from the list after his 22nd birthday.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Thank you.
The next matter for your consideration is a petition to place Edward Lepre on the involuntary exclusion list. On January 7, 2017, Mr. Lepre was caught using a fraudulent driver's license in an attempt to purchase a casino access card at Valley Forge Casino Resort while under the age of 21. On January 7, 2017, PSP charged Mr. Lepre with carrying a false identification card. On March 20th of 2017, Mr. Lepre pled guilty to that charge. At this time, OEC requested the board issue an order placing Edward Lepre on the involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Edward Lepre to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Mr. Lepre may petition for removal from that list after his 22nd birthday.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
The next matter for your consideration is a petition to place Esau Lepre on the involuntary exclusion list. On January 7, 2017, Mr. Lepre was caught using a fraudulent driver's license in an attempt to purchase a casino access card at Valley Forge Casino Resort while under the age of 21. On January 7, 2017, PSP charged Mr. Lepre with carrying a false identification card. On March 20th, 2017, Mr. Lepre pled guilty to that charge. On January 13th, 2017, Mr. Lepre was caught a second time using a fraudulent driver's license in an attempt to access the gaming floor at Valley Forge Casino Resort while under the age of 21. PSP charged Mr. Lepre with defiant trespass and carrying a false identification card by a minor. Those charges remain pending. At this time, OEC requests that the board issue an order placing Esau Lepre on the involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Esau Lepre to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Mr. Lepre may petition for removal from this list after his 22nd birthday.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Michael Rowland, ROL A&D with the Office of Enforcement Counsel. Next is a request to place Thayer Dayoub on the involuntary exclusion list. On February 3rd, 2017, underage patron Thayer Dayoub, who was age 20, attempted to gain access to the gaming floor at Sands Casino by providing a false identification. Mr. Dayoub attempted to gain entrance via the bus entrance, where he was stopped, and security determined that the identification provided was a fake. Mr. Dayoub was charged by the Pennsylvania State Police with carrying a false identification card, to which he's already entered a guilty plea. The matter is now before the board to consider the placement of Thayer Dayoub on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Thayer Dayoub to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Mr. Dayoub may petition for removal from the list after his 22nd birthday.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next is a request to place Kristjana Keko on the involuntary exclusion list. On October 30th, 2016, underage patron Kristjana Keko, who was age 20, gained access to the gaming floor at Sands Casino, successfully gamed and consumed alcoholic beverages. She provided a false identification to gain entrance and was on the gaming floor for approximately 2 hours and 9 minutes. She gamed at 3 separate slot machines and 1 table game for approximately 31 minutes, and she consumed only a single alcoholic beverage. Ms. Keko was not criminally charged. The matter is now before the board to consider the placement of Kristjana Keko on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Kristjana Keko to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Ms. Kecko may petition for removal from the list after 1 year.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Next is a request to place Jacob McCreesh on the involuntary exclusion list. On December 23, 2016, underage patron Jacob McCreesh, who was age 20, gained access to the gaming floor at Sands Casino with a false identification, and he successfully gamed. Mr. McCreesh was challenged at the bus entrance and provided a legitimate identification which belonged to another individual and was granted access to the floor. He was challenged again while playing blackjack and this time provided his actual driver's license verifying he was underage. Mr. McCreesh was on the gaming floor for approximately 2 hours and 47 minutes. He gamed at 2 separate table games for a total of approximately 1 hour and 19 minutes. Mr. McCreesh was charged by the Pennsylvania State Police with underage on the gaming floor, to which he entered a guilty plea, and this matter is now before the board to consider the placement of Jacob McCreesh on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Jacob McCreesh to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Mr. McCreesh may petition for removal from the list after his 22nd birthday.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
Next is a request to place Ted Romeo on the involuntary exclusion list. On December 17, 2016, Ted Romeo assisted his underage daughter, who we'll refer to as CR because she's age 16, with gaining access to the gaming floor at Sands Casino, where she successfully gamed. CR entered the gaming floor through the market entrance with her father and was not challenged by security officers. CR was discovered by a beverage server who challenged her for her identification. CR was on the gaming floor for approximately 32 minutes and gamed at 1 slot machine for approximately 2 minutes. The matter is now before the board to consider the placement of Ted Romeo on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Ted Romeo to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Mr. Romeo may petition for removal from the list after 1 year.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's adopted.
And last is a request to place Saida Taylor on the involuntary exclusion list. On February 4th, 2017, underage patron Saida Taylor attempted to gain access to the gaming floor at Sands Casino by providing her mother's identification. She attempted to gain the entrance through the bus entrance where she was stopped and her identification was scanned. Security determined that the identification provided was not her identification and she admitted that in fact belonged to her mother. She was not charged by Pennsylvania State Police, and this matter is now before the board to consider the placement of Saida Taylor on the board's involuntary exclusion list.
Questions or comments from the board? May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board approve the addition of Saida Taylor to the PGCB involuntary exclusion list as described by the Office of Enforcement Counsel. I further move that Ms. Taylor may petition for removal from the list after her 22nd birthday.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted.
Thank you. That concludes our business.
Thank you very much. At this point, we have a scheduled public comment period. As I understand it, we do not have anyone who's registered to speak today. Nevertheless, is there anyone in the audience who wishes to make a public comment of any sort? Hearing none, that concludes today's meeting. Our next scheduled public session will be held on Wednesday, July 12th. The meeting will begin at 10 o'clock in this room. Are there any final comments from board members or ex officios? Hearing none, may I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Mr. Chairman, may I move adjournment in honor of Commissioner Amina Young?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion's adopted. Thank you very much.